Hello, dear literature lovers. Welcome to another extraordinary journey through time. Today we shall immerse ourselves in the frozen mists of Victorian England, where ancestral secrets awaken beneath the moonlight and truth emerges like a black rose blooming among the thorns of the past. This is the story of a young woman who discovered that her soul harbored the strength of entire generations and that true love can flourish even in the most barren lands of injustice. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What's your city? I'd love to know where our companions on this literary journey come from, and take advantage to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these stories that touch the heart and awaken deep reflections about our own existence. Saeson 1879, winter. Location: Ravenshollow Estate, Yorkshire County, England. The Gothic towers of Ravenshollow rose against the grey December sky like ancestral fingers touching the secrets of time. Charlotte moved through the shadowy corridors with the lightness of one who knew every stone, every sigh that the walls exhaled in the silent dawns. At 20 years old, her steps echoed through the halls with an inexplicable grace for someone raised among brooms and cleaning cloths. The black marble of the great hall reflected her slender silhouette as she polished every inch with almost religious devotion. The winter of 1879 had brought with it winds that whispered promises of change, but Charlotte remained focused on her routine, ignoring the shivers that ran down her spine whenever she contemplated the ancestral portraits hanging on the walls. It was then that the sound of horse hooves echoed in the cobblestone courtyard. Lord Edward Blackwood had returned from London after 4 months of absence. Charlotte raised her violet blue eyes, and for an instant that seemed eternal, the time suspended between them carried the weight of an impossible recognition. He stopped at the threshold, observing her movements as if trying to decipher a forgotten melody from childhood. What neither of them imagined was that this silent moment would seal a destiny written long before they were born. The flames of the fireplace danced, creating shadows that seemed alive among the shelves of Ravenshollow's library. Edward watched Charlotte as she organized the volumes with disconcerting familiarity. There was something in her gestures that awakened nebulous memories, fragments of conversations heard in childhood about tragedies that stained Yorkshire's lands with blood. With trembling fingers, he withdrew from a secret drawer an ancient silver medallion. The black rose engraved on its surface seemed to pulse under the golden light of the candles. Charlotte approached, and when her eyes met the symbol, an inexplicable pain pierced her chest like an icy blade. "This medallion," Edward murmured, his hoarse voice carrying the weight of unspoken revelations, "belonged to the Ashfords, a family that disappeared during the 3 bloody days of 1859. The silence that followed was dense as the fog that covered Yorkshire's marshlands. Charlotte felt the library walls spinning around her, as if the known world began to crumble to give way to a truth much more vast and terrifying. Without knowing she was pronouncing the words, she whispered a name she should never know. Lady Margaret Ashford, my mother. The north tower of Ravenshollow had remained closed for decades, but now its windows once again filtered the golden light of dusk. Charlotte walked through the chambers that Edward had insisted on preparing for her, feeling every fibre of her being awakened to memories she didn't know she possessed. The tapestries embroidered with black roses seemed familiar, like forgotten lullabies. During her daily lessons, Edward observed with growing fascination how she mastered ancient dialects with inexplicable naturalness. There was a refined intelligence in her movements, an intuitive understanding of strategy and politics that transcended any formal education. It was as if centuries of aristocratic wisdom flowed through her veins, dormant but never truly lost. The scar that crossed Edward's left face seemed to pulse when he told of the duel he had fought years before, defending the honor of a lady already dead. What he didn't know was that that sword had indirectly avenged Charlotte's family, staining Yorkshire's cold stones with justice. Between glances that prolonged beyond necessity and silences pregnant with meaning, something deeper than attraction bloomed between them, a recognition of souls meeting after a millenary separation. The medallion, they discovered, was more than a symbol. It was a key, and what it opened would change Yorkshire's destiny forever. Reginald Thornbury arrived at Ravenshollow in a black carriage that cut through the morning mist like an ominous omen. His small, calculating eyes surveyed every corner of the main hall, while Charlotte served tea with steady hands, despite the storm raging within her. There was something in that man's presence that awakened primitive flight instincts, as if her soul recognized an ancestral predator. Edward observed the growing tension, noticing how Charlotte involuntarily retreated whenever Thornbury approached. The distant cousin spoke about business of the former Ashford lands with a familiarity that bordered on obscenity, as if savouring every word he pronounced about abandoned properties he now administered. The preparation for the great New Year's ball transformed into a silent battle. Charlotte, wrapped in silks that Edward had insisted on ordering from London, discovered herself capable of moving through the halls with an elegance that surprised everyone. It was as if years of dormant aristocracy awakened with each waltz step. But Thornbury observed everything with eyes that glittered with poorly disguised hatred. When Charlotte demonstrated knowledge about the deplorable conditions in the coal mines he controlled, citing workers' names and details about dangerous tunnels she should never know, the man understood that his decades-old farce was threatened. The last midnight of 1879 brought with it more than fireworks. It brought war. The Guildhall of York rose majestically under the leaden January sky, its ancient stones witnesses to centuries of justice and injustice. Charlotte walked through the marble corridors with steps that echoed like beats of an ancestral heart, carrying not only her own cause, but the weight of an entire family crying for vengeance. The 5 lords and 3 ladies who composed the tribunal observed with poorly disguised skepticism, while Thornbury presented document after document, witness after witness. His words built a castle of lies so elaborate it seemed impenetrable, painting Charlotte as an impostor, trained since childhood for this farce. It was then that she rose. Without a single note, she recited family genealogies in medieval Latin that only a true Ashford could know. With surgical precision, she decoded encrypted messages engraved on Ravenshollow's walls, messages her parents had left as a final testimony before death. And when she finally used the medallion to open the ancestral coffer, hidden in the Guildhall itself, revealing testaments and letters that proved not only her identity, but the conspiracy that had decimated her family, the silence in the tribunal was deafening. Thornbury paled as if he had seen a ghost, and perhaps he had. The ghost of 20 years of crimes finally coming to light. The judge's gavel descended like the fist of divine justice itself. The echo of the gavel still reverberated through the Gothic vaults when Thornbury was led away in shackles through corridors he once thought he possessed. His properties, his mines, his empire built on blood and betrayal, everything crumbled like sandcastles touched by the tide of truth. Charlotte observed through the Guildhall window the lands that now returned to being hers, but her hands trembled not with joy, but with a responsibility that weighed like lead mantles on her delicate shoulders. Thousands of workers depended on those mines. Entire families lived in miserable hovels, while black gold enriched men without scruples. It was Edward who touched her shoulder with infinite tenderness, whispering words that carried promises of change. "You are not alone in this journey." The final revelation came when an elderly woman who had served in Ravenshollow's kitchen for 2 decades slowly removed the bonnet she always wore. The revealed greying hair had the same silky texture as Charlotte's, and the eyes that rose were violet-blue mirrors reflecting generations of love and sacrifice. Lady Eleanor Ashford had spent 20 years as a servant to protect her granddaughter, 20 years of silence and humiliation to ensure that a black rose could bloom again in Yorkshire's barren lands. Ravenshollow's gardens slumbered under February's white mantle when Edward led Charlotte through the frozen paths she had once traversed, only as a servant. Now, wrapped in furs and silks, she was Lady Charlotte Ashford, but in his eyes she remained the woman whose graceful steps had awakened his dormant heart. The eve of Valentine's Day brought with it a new intimacy between them. No longer the distance imposed by social differences, but the proximity of 2 souls recognizing each other as equals. Edward spoke of his plans for the mines, of hospitals to be built and schools to be founded, and Charlotte felt her heart expand like a flower finally finding adequate soil to flourish. When he knelt among the dormant rose bushes, offering not only a diamond ring but a partnership to transform Yorkshire into a more just land, Charlotte understood that true love was not conquest, but construction, not possession, but shared freedom. Her tears froze like crystals on the rose petals, but they were tears of gratitude. For the first time in life, someone loved her not despite her origins, but because of the strength they had given her. The yes she murmured echoed through the gardens like a hymn of hope, promising springs that would come even after the most rigorous winters. York Cathedral had never witnessed a more moving ceremony than the union of Charlotte Ashford and Edward Blackwood in May 1880. The ancient stones seemed to vibrate with the energy of hundreds of guests filling the Gothic naves, but for the bride and groom, the world had reduced to the glances they exchanged while pronouncing vows that transcended time. Charlotte wore the ancestral Ashford wedding dress, recovered from the secret coffer and restored by embroiderers who worked day and night to return its original glory. The ivory silk gown embroidered with black roses whispered stories of generations of women who had loved, suffered, and persevered in those same laces. The diamond tiara crowning her chestnut golden hair had belonged to her great-grandmother, and each stone seemed to capture the candlelight like crystallized tears of joy. When Edward lifted the delicate veil and their lips met at the altar, it was not just a kiss. It was the union of two lineages committing to use their power to heal the wounds the past had opened. The cathedral bells rang, announcing not only a wedding, but the birth of a new era for Yorkshire, an era where justice would flourish like black roses in the previously barren gardens of inequality. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days, and mine workers danced side by side with aristocracy, for Charlotte had insisted that all who helped build her fortune should share in her joy. The first months of marriage brought transformations that echoed throughout Yorkshire County like waves in a tranquil lake. Charlotte and Edward worked side by side from dawn, visiting the mines that now belonged to her, listening to workers' stories with attention few nobles had ever shown. The first reforms were radical: reduced working hours, fair wages, safety equipment imported from Germany, but it was the construction of the region's first public hospital that truly touched the hearts of those simple people. Charlotte insisted it be erected on the former Ashford lands, as if wanting to transform the place where her parents had died into a symbol of life and hope. Nights were dedicated to plans for the orphanage that would become the pride of all England. Charlotte personally designed the rooms, remembering her own solitary childhood and determined to ensure no child would grow up without love and dignity. Edward observed his wife with growing admiration. There was in her a strength that transcended noble blood. It was nobility of spirit, forged in adversity's fire and tempered by suffering's wisdom. Each decision they made together planted seeds of a more just future, and their private gardens bloomed like living metaphors of the transformation they promoted. The autumn of 1880 arrived, tinting the trees golden, and with it came the news that would complete the couple's happiness. Winter brought more than snow to Ravenshollow. It brought the promise of life growing in Charlotte's womb like a delicate and precious miracle. Edward enveloped her in care that bordered on religious devotion, and she flourished under that attention like a rose finally free to reach its full splendor. Social reforms continued, but now there was new urgency in their plans. They wanted to build a world worthy of the child to come, a legacy that transcended material wealth. The orphanage was inaugurated in a moving ceremony where Charlotte, already showing her rounded belly, cut the red ribbon with tears in her eyes. 50 orphaned children found home that first winter, and each laugh echoing through the heated corridors was like celestial music to Charlotte. She walked among the little ones with the grace of a queen mother, offering not just shelter, but the possibility of dreaming of bright futures. Letters arriving from throughout the British Empire brought requests for advice on social reforms. The Ravenshollow model was spreading like benevolent fire, inspiring other nobles to look at their duties with new perspective. But it was on Christmas Eve 1880 that Charlotte felt the first contractions, and Ravenshollow's chapel bell began to ring, announcing that new Ashford heirs were about to arrive in the world. The dawn of December 25, 1880, will be remembered forever at Ravenshollow as the aurora of miracles. When the first ray of sun penetrated the North Tower's stained glass windows, 2 vigorous cries echoed through the corridors. Elizabeth and William Ashford Blackwood had arrived in the world as divine gifts on Christ's birthday. Charlotte held the twins against her chest with a tenderness that seemed to radiate its own light. Elizabeth had the violet blue eyes of the Ashford lineage, while William had inherited the dark, penetrating eyes of the Blackwoods. But both carried in their delicate faces the promise of a future where justice and love would walk side by side. Edward observed his wife and children with an emotion that the most poetic words couldn't express. 3 generations of Ashfords had been brutally cut down, but there in that room bathed by Christmas's golden light, the lineage was reborn stronger and more determined than ever. Lady Eleanor, now officially recognized as grandmother and counsellor, held the black rose medallion that would be passed to Elizabeth when she turned 18. The symbol that once represented tragedy and loss now symbolized renewal and hope. The bells of all Yorkshire's churches rang that morning, announcing not only the birth of two noble heirs, but the birth of a new era where compassion would be the most valuable of family inheritances. The year 1900 found Charlotte at 40, seated in the same library, where she had once discovered the truth about her identity. But now the shelves were filled with volumes on social reform, medicine, and education, knowledge she had accumulated during 2 decades of tireless work for justice. Elizabeth, at 20, had become a radiant young woman who combined her mother's strategic intelligence with her father's sense of justice. William, equally determined, prepared to assume administration of the mines, implementing revolutionary technologies that would make work safer and more efficient. Ravenshollow Hospital had expanded 3 times, serving not only Yorkshire but neighbouring counties. The original orphanage had generated a network of similar institutions throughout England, and the educational model developed by Charlotte was studied at London and Oxford universities. But it was on that golden September afternoon that Charlotte made the decision that would crown her life of dedication, transform the Black Rose Medallion into the symbol of a charity fund that would help orphans throughout the British Empire. No longer a family treasure kept in secret, but a beacon of hope visible to all who needed light in darkness. Edward, now 52 with silver hair that gave him even more distinction, observed his wife with the same admiration as the first day. Time had only deepened their love, like wine improving in well-tended cellars. It was on a stormy October night in 1900 that Charlotte gathered the entire family in the library to reveal the last secret she had kept for 2 decades. Elizabeth and William, now adults, observed their mother with growing curiosity as she withdrew from a private coffer a manuscript yellowed by time. "My dear children," Charlotte said, her voice carrying the weight of years of silence, "the time has come to know the complete truth about our family." The manuscript contained not only the Ashford history, but revelations that would forever change understanding of the 1859 massacre. Thornbury had not been merely a greedy conspirator, he had been the mentor of a corruption network extending to the British Parliament itself. The Ashford coal mines guarded more than mineral wealth. They guarded evidence of fraudulent contracts signed with the Crown, documents that could have changed the energy policy course of the entire empire. The family massacre had not been just for personal greed, but to protect secrets threatening royal fortunes. Charlotte had spent 20 years gathering evidence, building alliances, preparing ground for a revelation that would shake English aristocracy's foundations. But she wouldn't do it for revenge. She would do it for justice, to ensure other orphans wouldn't lose their families to political ambitions. The storm outside seemed to echo the intensity of emotions taking hold of the library. Elizabeth and William finally understood the magnitude of the legacy they carried, not just fortune and titles, but the responsibility to transform a corrupted system into a force for good. The spring of 1901 arrived at Ravenshollow, laden with promises that transcended seasons. Charlotte walked through the gardens she had redesigned over the years, observing the black rose bushes that now bloomed abundantly where once only thorns of injustice grew. The revelations about parliamentary conspiracy had resulted in reforms that changed the entire mining concession system of the British Empire. Dozens of families recovered usurped properties, and working conditions in mines throughout the country improved drastically. Elizabeth had announced her engagement to a young doctor who shared her passion for social reforms, while William prepared to begin law studies, determined to use laws to protect the underprivileged. The Black Rose Medallion, now a recognized symbol throughout the empire, would adorn Elizabeth's neck on her wedding day, no longer as an inheritance of tragedy, but as a promise of hope. Edward held Charlotte's hand as they watched grandchildren play in the garden, the children of Elizabeth and William, who would be born carrying not the weight of the past, but the wings of the future. 40 years had passed since he returned from London and found a young servant polishing black marble with the grace of a forgotten princess. "Do you believe in destiny?" Edward murmured, his eyes meeting hers with the same intensity as the first days. Charlotte smiled, delicately touching the medallion she now wore over her heart. "I believe we are the gardeners of our own destiny. We plant seeds of love and harvest forests of hope." Yorkshire's wind carried her words across fields, extending as far as the eye could see, lands that had known tears of blood and now knew tears of joy. The black roses swayed gently, as if whispering to future generations that justice, like true love, may sleep but never dies. It only awaits the right moment to bloom again.